home alone. Quote, her best friend's parents were out of town one weekend and she had the house to herself. Went about her business having dinner, watching TV, then decided to go to bed. She was lying in her bed with her back to her closet when she heard the door open. She somehow pretended to be asleep. The man who was hiding in the closet walked around her bed to the side she was laying/facing, gently stroked her hair and face, then left. She immediately called her boyfriend to ask him to come over, then called her parents and then the police. Long story short, this man had been getting into their home via a doggy door. They didn't have a dog and didn't bother to secure it, and he'd been living in a tent in the forested area behind their home for months to creep on her. They found a ton of surveillance footage of her sleeping and pieces of her clothes and stuff. If I recall correctly, this happened somewhere in Alabama, most likely mid-2000s. End quote. Welcome back. Dark recaps here. Hit that like button and subscribe for more creepy true stories every week. Let's continue. Party invite. Quote, a guy I was good friends with had a party one night and called me to invite me over. It was me and my wife's first day off together in a while, and our daughter was 2 years old. I mentioned it to my wife and my daughter said, "No, don't go, Daddy." Of course I couldn't resist that, so I stayed home and we had a good night. My friend, however, had the worst night of his life. His party was going well and everything was fine, even though there was a friend of a friend there who no one really knew. Turns out the stranger had been smoking PCP and decided to start killing people. He took a butcher knife and slashed 3 people's throats. My friend's wife threw their kids out of a 2-story window and jumped out herself, took them into the woods and called the police. All 3 people died. The police found the guy walking down the side of the road covered in blood and incoherent. He had no idea what he just did. End quote. The Wichita Massacre. Quote, H.G., the lone survivor of what would later be called the Wichita Massacre. She was a 25-year-old elementary school teacher at the time and had gone to the triplex where her boyfriend, Jason Befford, a science teacher, lived with 2 roommates, Brad Heika, a chemist, and Aaron Sander, who was studying to become a priest. H.G. settled in front of the TV and began grading papers when Heather Muller, a friend of Aaron Sanders, showed up. The 5 friends watched TV and eventually retired to their various bedrooms. H.G. was woken from her sleep shortly after by loud voices and the bedroom door being kicked open. The 2 perps eventually gathered all of the persons in the residence and herded them to the bedroom and ordered them, at gunpoint, to strip. Many atrocities occurred as hours went by, but in the end H.G., after being shot in the head in a frozen soccer field, ran naked for almost a mile to find a house with Christmas lights. It was mid-December, to beg for assistance. End quote. Shasta Groene. Quote, the murder of the Groene family. A deranged pedo named Joseph Edward Duncan was already on the run from the cops for a past sexual assault. He was incredibly charming and manipulative and was truly pure evil. He camped outside a family's rural home, unseen by them. He picked it out after driving past it and seeing children's toys outside. He watched them from afar, got to know their routine with the intent of kidnapping the children, 10-year-old Dylan, 8-year-old Shasta. Jed found the lock on the door was broken, entered the home in the middle of the night and tied up the mom, dad, and teenage son. He put Shasta and Dylan in his car and killed the rest of the family with a hammer. He traveled around various campsites and cabins with Shasta and Dylan captive, sexually abusing, torturing, and raping them. He eventually shot Dylan, but Shasta talked him out of killing her. Jed ended up telling her she taught him how to love. The scariest part is the CCTV footage of Jed and Shasta at a gas station. because you could easily believe they were just a normal dad and a grumpy daughter if you were an onlooker. Eventually, he took her to a diner where he was finally apprehended when a waitress noticed something was up and Shasta was saved after 7 weeks in his clutches. As he was dragged away, he called to her, "Promise me you'll visit me in prison," and she said she would. I don't know if she ever did. Jed was put on death row and found to be guilty of 3 previous child murders. He died a few months ago from cancer. But the worst part of it all is how horrible Shasta's life has been afterwards. Drug addiction, in and out of jail, losing her children, etc. Just the most terrifying story ever. End quote. The worst visit to the eye doctor ever. Quote, "I'm an eye doctor and I had a patient come to me with an infected eyelid 2 other eye doctors tried to treat and failed. They were dumping all sorts of medicine into it and it wasn't getting any better. At this point, it was swollen and painful for weeks with no improvement despite being on tons of meds. Apparently, neither of them thought to flip the lid upside down. You know that gross trick some kids do with their upper eyelids? It was a painful maneuver for her very swollen eyelid, which might explain it. Anyhow, there appeared to be what looked like a visible abscess inside the tissue with thick gooey material. I thought I'd give it a nudge and saw it move. This wasn't an abscess, it was something else. I managed to remove it quite easily in one whole piece. It was a fly larva. The patient told me that she had a bug hit her in the eye a few days before she got this infection. I removed the larva and within 2 days the wound closed and she was 100% recovered on basic antibiotic eye drops. Yes, I do have the photos from this case for those interested." End quote. The body in the barrel. A Reina Marroquin story. Quote, "A young lady had an affair with her boss in the 1960s, got pregnant. After threatening to tell her boss wife, she was killed by her boss, who then put her body in an industrial barrel. He hid the barrel in his house for years and none of the various owners opened it due to the weight. Finally, one guy decided to dispose of it in the 90s, and when he opened it he saw it contained something. An investigation traced the barrel and girl back to the man, who then killed himself before police could come to arrest him after confirming he was the father of the unborn baby via DNA. The lady's mother was in her late 80s when she was told her missing daughter was finally found. She claims that she had been having dreams about her daughter being inside a metal container for years after she had gone missing." End quote. USS West Virginia. Quote, "The USS West Virginia was a ship damaged during the attack on Pearl Harbor. After the ship was attacked, the people on board heard banging noises coming from inside the ship. Turns out that these noises were people. They were trapped in a room to where they couldn't be broken out of it because of the water that would seep in and drown them, and they couldn't be brought out from the top because of the gases that lingered there that were extremely flammable. When the vessel was salvaged 6 months later, the bodies of these 3 men were found. The other things that remained were empty cans of food and water and a calendar marked from December 7th to December 23rd. This means they were trapped there for 16 days. They probably kept wondering if they were ever going to make it out, and then had to come to the realization that they might not be saved, and they had the fear of drowning in the tight little compartment of the ship. They had to face the realization that you are going to die and the psychological torture that goes along with it." End quote. A New Life. Quote, "A woman I worked with a few years ago told me how her life had changed drastically. She went from having a decent job to becoming an alcoholic and working as a cleaner. She had planned to move to Spain with her husband and young daughter and had a great job lined up out there. The plan was that her husband and daughter would fly over first and she would fly over a week or 2 later due to finishing her old job a little later than planned. Her husband rang her on the day he arrived and said the house was lovely and the furniture had arrived by ferry ECT. That was the last time she ever heard from him. Her husband and daughter were found dead by authorities a few days after she rang, explaining she was concerned for their welfare as she had had no contact with them and she was extremely worried. It was carbon monoxide poisoning. It is so scary to think how fast your life can change. End quote. Do not try to find us. Quote. This isn't a scary story, but it's spooky and always captured my imagination. One day a bunch of, I think they were police in training, explored some of the catacombs under Paris. A lot of them are completely unmapped. They entered an area and heard dogs barking and snarling. They continued going and saw there were speakers mounted on the wall, playing pre-recorded dog sounds and cameras. They continued. They came into this huge opening and found a cinema. It was lavishly decorated. It had projectors and a mix of old and new movies. It even had electricity running and 3 phone lines. The police marked where they were and went back outside. The next day they returned to try and investigate further with more experienced officers. Everything was gone. All the wiring had been ripped out, all the furniture was gone. All that remained was a note that said, "Do not try to find us." As far as I know, they never figured out who was there. End quote. The creepy chairman. Quote. There was a guy in my town who stalked women at the furniture store. He would watch women pick out new chairs and he would just linger there and drop these strange comments. That chair would look nice in my den. Then one night he followed one of the women home. He sneaked into their living room and then waited for them to enter the room. He'd then jump out and surprise them. He'd yell, "I knew you took my chair." And he'd scream and chase them. This happened over the course of 5 years. The local police never did anything because he was brothers with the sheriff. Women couldn't buy furniture by themselves. They had to start bringing chaperones. End quote. Let me know in the comments if you have ever experienced something disturbing like this. I'd be interested to read about your experience. Thanks for watching and please consider leaving a like on this video. If you enjoy the content, hitting that subscribe button doesn't cost you anything. Take care, and I'll see you guys next time.